6 months ago, if you wanted a personal AI agent, you just installed OpenClaw. Everybody did this and we saw a massive amount of hype. Then, this June, Hermes Agent passed it. It's now at over 224 billion tokens per day versus OpenClaw at 186 billion. So which one should you actually run today? Well, in this video, I'm going to set up both on real servers with real tokens that I paid for, and I'm going to run the exact same jobs through each one so you can see how they differ and which one is best for your use case. And I'm not just going to tell you, oh yeah, you should use both, because the reality here is that one is much better than the other, specifically at certain set of tasks, and we're going to dive into that right now. So let's start by looking at a few numbers, understand where these projects stand, and then we're going to get into all of the specifics. Now, OpenClaw is a much more mature project. It was released in November 2025. It has over 137 releases at this time. It has a massive hub of skills that you can install. At one point, they had over 13,000 skills. There was then a bunch of security issues that purged it down to 3,300, and now it's grown back up to 5,400 at the time of recording this video. Compared to Hermes Agent, this was released later in February 2026. It only has 11 releases, at least when I'm recording this video. And while it doesn't come with a massive amount of skills out of the box, it can build its own skills, and you can actually take any skills that will be available for OpenClaw and install them in Hermes Agent. It's just not as native. Continuing, if we look at the native providers, this is for AI integrations, messaging platforms, etc. OpenClaw definitely has a lot more. It's a more mature ecosystem, whereas with Hermes Agent, you still can connect to pretty much anything you would want to, but a lot of those model connections are going to happen through OpenRouter. If we look at daily tokens, we already talked about this, but Hermes has recently surpassed OpenClaw. And then one thing that's super important is that OpenClaw has had a bad reputation with security. There was a massive incident that happened in February of 2026 where over 40,000 OpenClaw instances were exposed to the internet, meaning they could be configured, changed, and were publicly available. Whereas with Hermes, there's been a lot less security issues. There has still been some, but generally speaking, people would consider Hermes Agent a little bit more secure. At this point, it's not as big of an issue because releases have fixed these, but it is something that you should be aware of. Now, in case you're not super familiar with these tools, I do just want to quickly cover what these actually are. Really, the way that you should think about OpenClaw and Hermes Agent is that they're really just an LLM, so some kind of model or brain, wrapped with a bunch of different tools. So we have tools, right? MCP servers, things that can go to the internet or go to your Google Drive or go to your Gmail. We have skills. These are essentially large markdown files that explain how to do a task so you can do it reliably and repeatably multiple times. We have memory. This is so you can save, store information, know what was talked about in previous sessions, and improve over time. And then we have a gateway. This is the way in which you interact with the model, or in this case, kind of the agent tool, right? So we could have Telegram, we could have Discord, we could have email. There's all different kinds of things there. Now, both OpenClaw and Hermes Agent have all of these features, and the thing that differs is really how well they work and the way in which they operate, which is what we're going to dive into. With OpenClaw, your skills and your memory aren't quite as fine-tuned as they are with Hermes. Whereas with Hermes, the gateway isn't quite as good as it is with OpenClaw. So we're going to go through all of those differences, and that will give you the information to understand which one you should pick. So this leads us nicely into what the key difference really is here between these two tools. Now with OpenClaw, this is really built around a skill catalog. This means that there's a ton of skills that have already been written, and what you can do is go, browse, and install them. So really, when you're using OpenClaw, you're going through this huge marketplace, you're searching for something that already exists, and you're clicking install. Whereas with Hermes, this is built around a self-learning loop. What this means is that the more you use it, the better it gets. It remembers things about you by default, and it will automatically create skills based on what you're asking it to do. So if you just want something really quick out of the box, you want to use some existing skills, it's probably easier to do that with OpenClaw. Whereas if you're planning on using this agent for a long time, you're going to be chatting with it a lot, you're going to be improving what you're doing, continuing to teach it things and tell it about different processes and systems, Hermes Agent is going to be really good because it will actually get better over time. Now, it's worth noting that technically both of these tools can accomplish the exact same goals, and anything you could do with Hermes Agent, you could also do with OpenClaw. It's really just how they're set up and which one is going to work faster for your use case because of how it's designed. So keep that in mind. There's not really a wrong decision. One is just going to be faster to get to the end product with based on how it's set up. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this catalog of skills is not just specific to OpenClaw. You can actually take these same skills and run them on Hermes Agent. So don't think that you can't install pre-built skills on Hermes. You absolutely can. It's just a little bit more difficult to set up. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to deploy two instances. I'm going to deploy an OpenClaw instance and a Hermes Agent instance. We're going to give them the same tasks, and I'm going to show you what the setup looks like, how you run them, and what the practical difference is when you actually have both of these agents spun up. Now, when it comes to deploying these agents and setting them up, you can install them on your own computer and your own physical hardware devices, but typically that's not going to be recommended. That's because you're opening this up to your account, your network, all of your files. When you have an autonomous AI agent running, it can do things that you didn't explicitly ask it to do. If you do get hacked or something does occur, it's going to be a lot more damaging on your own computer, on your own network, than it would be if you used a disposable device. Now, what I typically recommend and how I set up all of my AI agents is using a virtual private server. This is a server that runs in the cloud on a company's infrastructure. It's a lot more secure by default than your own machine would be. And the most important part here is that if something goes wrong, you can just nuke the server. You pay 5, 10, 15 bucks a month, whatever. And if something does go wrong, all of this is isolated on somebody else's hardware. You can press a single button, you can delete it, uninstall it, and stop it from running, and do this remotely from anywhere, and then just restart on another VPS. And especially if you're a beginner and you don't know a lot about security, this is going to be a safer option that just gives you a reset button if something does go wrong. So anyways, what I'm going to do now is deploy the two instances. Let's go through the process. So for all my AI agents and virtual private servers, I personally use Hostinger. Been using them for years now, and they have one-click deploy options for both. So I'm just on the OpenClaw page, and you can see that you can just select a plan here, and it will deploy and set everything up for you automatically. Same thing with Hermes Agent. What I typically use is the KVM2 plan when I'm deploying this. I'll leave them both in the description. And full transparency, I have a long-term partnership with Hostinger. They sponsored a bunch of videos on this channel, and that means that I actually have a discount code that you can use. It's Tech with Tim. This will give you an additional 10% off any subscription as long as it's 12 months or beyond. When you are going to deploy these, I recommend that you uncheck the ready to use AI. This allows you to put in your own API keys. If you just want it set up immediately, you don't want to touch anything, you can enable that. But if you want a little bit more control, better to remove that. Same thing on Hermes Agent. I'd recommend going with the KVM2 plan. You can use my discount code if you want, and then you can deploy both of these. It will set everything up for you and you will be good to go. So let me deploy these and show you what it looks like. So both of the agents have been deployed here. Worth noting that I didn't do any setup. I didn't install this from the command line. You can do that, and if you install it on your own device manually, you will need to go through a little bit of setup, but it's pretty straightforward to follow through, and you just need an API key for the model provider that you want to use. Now, OpenClaw's UI looks something like this. This is the main chat interface. You can change the model, and then Hermes looks something like this. Now, this is the user interface. By default, Hermes does not come with a user interface and you need to install it. But if you do this through Hostinger, it will automatically set it up for you. Now, for both of these agents, there is a ton of configuration you can go through to really optimize it for your use case. I'm not going to do all of that. I want to show you kind of what you get out of the box. So if we look at the OpenClaw control board, you can see that this is, in my opinion, a little bit more complicated. You have a lot of configuration options. You can kind of do everything directly here from the user interface. You can manage skills, agents. You can have different nodes and different gateways. You have obviously communication if you want to chat through Telegram or Discord or something like that. Automation, infrastructure, etc. Okay, and I would say this is a little bit more kind of developer focused, whereas if we look at something like Hermes and we check the boards, we have different tasks, scheduled jobs. We have a Kanban board. This will give us kind of different swim lanes of what it is that it's working on and we need to do. We have different skills that are built in by default, and then we can enable or disable them, so it comes with all of these automatically enabled. OpenClaw has some as well. We have the memory, which is really easy to manage, different spaces, profiles, to-dos, insights, and then the logs. And this, at least from a user perspective, is easier to work with and manage from the beginning, whereas OpenClaw is going to give you a lot more controls. Now with Hermes, you of course can go in the settings and you can change some stuff here, but you'll notice it's a little bit more bare bones than OpenClaw, at least from the UI control. So what I want to do now is give both of them the same task, and let's see how they perform. So now that we've had a look at the user interfaces, I want to show you some of the key differences between these tools. Keep in mind that these are a lot more exaggerated when you use them over long periods of time. It's very difficult to demo this in just 3 or 4 minutes, but I wanted to start from a fresh instance so you get kind of how it works. All right, so let's go to OpenClaw. Now, one of the main differences between these tools is skills, skill review, and how skills are handled. Now, with OpenClaw, typically if you want a skill, some kind of reusable workflow, what you're going to do is go to this skills tab. You're going to go to where it says Claw Hub, which should be set up for you automatically, and you're going to search for it. So you might search for something like GitHub, and you can see there's just a ton of skills that are going to pop up. And these are coming from Claw Hub, where there's like over 5,000 skills you can use. And you can click into one, you can read what it looks like, okay? And then you can install the skill. I mean, this one is super basic, but you get the idea. So that's typically how you would work with skills. And then if you wanted to make your own custom skill, you could do that, but you would have to manually tell the model. So you'd say, hey, I want you to make a skill to do X, Y, Z. And then it can make one and install it and set it up, but it's not being handled automatically. Whereas when you're using Hermes Agent, what actually happens is it has something called a curator. Now, this is going to be going through your memory, your session logs, and what you've been chatting with the agent about, and automatically determining whether it needs to create a skill or not. So if you've done something 5, 6, 7, 8 times, it's going to detect, hey, this is probably something I want to turn into a skill, and it will automatically make that file for you and just set it up so you can reuse it. And as you use this over time, it will automatically adjust the skill to improve it and adjust it based on what you're telling the agent to do. So if you just want to install a skill by default, OpenClaw a little bit easier to do that. If you want to have your own skills that are based on your actual workflow, Hermes will do that for you. And if you go to the skills tab right here, you can see there's a bunch that are already built in that it will use by default. If you search for something like GitHub, you can see it already has a bunch of them here, and that's already installed because that's a popular thing to do in Hermes. And then if you want to add a new skill, it doesn't have the marketplace by default. You can just put in your own. So you can say, content writer, give it a category, give it a description, and you can just do it like that. So that's one of the main differences is skills. Now, another main difference here is memory. Both of these tools will automatically save things to memory for you, but the memory in Hermes Agent is optimized significantly. It's much faster, it's better at detecting when it needs to write to memory, and it can recall through more memory than OpenClaw can. Again, you can change things in OpenClaw to make this better, but typically if you want kind of an ongoing agent that improves over time, that's why you use Hermes. So just to elaborate a bit on this, this is the Curator page directly from Hermes. You can read it if you want. What you'll notice is that there is a background maintenance process that's essentially going through any of the agent created skills, which will be created automatically or by you manually telling it, and it will move those skills through an active, stale, and archive state based on which ones are used and how often they're being considered. Now it says that it exists so that the skills created via the self-improvement loop don't pile up forever. So that means you can keep creating skills without getting a ton of context bloat. It explains in depth how it works, but that's one of the main distinguishers between Hermes Agent. And you'll see here that this is the self-improvement loop that it's talking about. So the agent can create, update, and delete its own skills via the skill manage tool. This is the agent's procedural memory. When it figures out a non-trivial workflow, which I'll try to demo in 1 second, it saves the approach as a skill for future reuse, right? And then it works together with the memory to be able to give you a better result and improve over time. So let's try to see this in action. I'm going to paste kind of a 7-step workflow here and see if it will automatically create the skill. Again, sometimes it's hard when we're just doing one prompt at a time, but let's run that. And then I'll run the same thing in OpenClaw and see if we get any difference. Okay, so both tools are finished here. If we look at Hermes Agent, you can see that it wrote, what it needed to do, and then it outlined the steps that it took to complete this. And in order to test if this created a new skill for me, what I did is I just opened up a new conversation session and I said, hey, run my video research brief again. I need you to do X, Y, Z. And then it said, okay, I'm going to do this. And notice that the first thing it did is it looked up a skill. Now this skill here, source-driven briefs, is one that's not built into Hermes by default. This is one that was actually created after we asked it, in the previous conversation to create this for us. So it generated this automatically in the background. It then loaded this skill and used it to make the brief again. So that's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of the self-improvement. Now with OpenClaw here, it was able to generate the brief. What I'm going to do now is just open a new conversation and we'll test if it automatically made the skill. Okay, so let's ask it to run the research video brief again and see if we get a response. So you'll see right now, if we just look through the output, there's nothing related to any skills. And while it is able to search through the memory, which we can see here, and find the response, it's a lot less efficient, it takes longer, and it's not using that skill. So now if it ever forgets that memory is not loaded in context, it's not going to be able to give us the response. And that's really the key difference here between Hermes and OpenClaw, how the memory is managed and how the skills are automatically handled and produced. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Now let's talk about a few other differences. So at this point, you're probably saying, okay, well, I'm just going to use Hermes Agent, right? Because it seems like it's better. Now, for most of you, that's the correct choice. Hermes Agent is better as more of a personal assistant or something that you chat with a lot. Now, I will say that one of the things that does give OpenClaw a little bit of an edge, and probably the only reason I would use it now in 2026, is its gateway management and advanced configuration. So let's say that you want to have multiple people from different areas chatting with your bot. Maybe you want it to be customer facing. Maybe you want to have different people in your organization using it. In my experience, it's easier to set up multiple gateways with OpenClaw and route them into different agents with shared memory than it is to do that with Hermes. I'm going to go back to my presentation to explain this. So for example, maybe you have Telegram users, Discord users, website widget, WhatsApp line. You can have different gateways set up in OpenClaw that can handle that. You can also do this in Hermes Agent, but again, in my experience, it's a little bit easier and more intuitive inside of OpenClaw. So that's one reason why you might want to use this, is if you have different types of avatars or people using it. If you're just a single user, you're probably going to go with Hermes. Now, you're going to notice that the main gap here is the repetitive work. We already saw this a little bit with OpenClaw. Everything that you're doing is pretty much manual. You need to tell it to make a skill. You need to know that it needs to optimize this. Whereas with Hermes, it's doing all of that in the background for you. Now, when you have this setup, it actually means that your agent gets cheaper to run over time because it's learning how to do things and it doesn't need to rediscover that. You saw that when we wanted to remake the brief, it just pulled the skill that was already there, that was created one time. Whereas OpenClaw, anytime we wanted to do that, if we didn't manually tell it to make the skill, it needs to figure this out again. It needs to search the memory, go through the tools, and it doesn't have that baked in like Hermes Agent does, which means it can be very expensive to run continuously. Now, continuing here, the bigger ecosystem also leads to a bigger target. So with OpenClaw, if you're installing a ton of different skills from the Claw Hub, a lot of these could have security vulnerabilities. And this is exactly what we saw back in February, where people had all of these skills baked in, or they've set up things incorrectly, where they're exposed on the web. Whereas with Hermes, it's a lot smaller surface. You're not pulling in all of this stuff externally, which leads to it being typically a little bit more secure. Now let's keep going and let's just have a look at a side-by-side comparison. So when we talk about cost, typically going to be a bit more expensive with OpenClaw on the same tasks, whereas with Hermes, it optimizes and gets better over time. In terms of the setup, OpenClaw is one click, same with Hermes. However, it can be a little bit more advanced to set up, especially if we get into the gateway stuff. You saw the UI is not quite as friendly, whereas with Hermes, it's pretty much just there, ready to go, and you don't really need to tweak anything. In terms of capability, there is more skills definitely with OpenClaw. You have that multi-gateway support. You have a ton of different providers. So maybe you have a little bit more advanced capability. But with Hermes, you have the learning loop, you have the memory, and it can also run the same OpenClaw skills. You can just pull them in and manually create them there. Now, OpenClaw is going to be best for things that are customer-facing, multi-channel, a lot more advanced, where you want to kind of get your hands dirty, whereas Hermes is significantly better as a daily driver, anything that repeats or that you're going to be chatting with a lot. So in most cases, you're going to go with Hermes. But if for some reason you're a more advanced user, you have kind of this special use case, then OpenClaw can be considered. But that's pretty much the conclusion, guys. I would almost always go with Hermes in 2026, but I wanted to show you why that's the case, that you have some evidence to back up that decision and you know which is best for you. So I'm going to wrap up the video here. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.